You know, when you've been around as long as I have, you start to think you've seen everything there is to see. Wars come and go, heroes rise, villains fall. Nations lose their way, and sometimes they find it again. I've walked through the decades like a man watching the same movie with a new cast every time. The faces change, the mistakes don't. But a few nights ago, something happened that made me stop pretending I'd seen it all. I had a dream, not the kind that fades with daylight, but one that burns its way into your bones and won't let you go. In that dream, I found myself standing in a wide open desert, a silence so deep it felt alive. There was no sun beating down, no wind stirring the dust, just stillness. And then, without warning, he was there, Jesus Christ. Not the way the paintings show him, not in robes of light or thunderous majesty, just calm, steady, the kind of presence that makes every other sound, every thought fall silent. I'm no preacher, never claimed to be, but I know truth when I feel it, and truth was standing right in front of me. He looked at me with eyes that saw straight through all the years I'd lived, through the noise of the world, and he said, "Clint, America doesn't see what's coming. She's walking blind, chasing shadows, calling the darkness light." His voice wasn't angry, it was sorrowful, like a father watching his children forget who they are. I wanted to speak, to ask what he meant, but my voice wouldn't come. Then I saw the sky change, clouds forming, heavy with something more than rain. The air itself trembled. He said, 2026 won't be just another year. It will be a year of revealing when the masks come off, when what's been hidden in plain sight stands in the open. I could feel the truth of it, like the ground itself was groaning. I saw confusion in the cities, leaders talking but saying nothing, people shouting past each other while forgetting how to listen. And then he turned to me again and said, "They've built towers without truth, nations without faith. When the wind comes, what's not built on me will fall." I remember the warmth of his hand on my shoulder, real and grounding. He said, "Tell them to prepare not with fear, but with faith. The storm isn't meant to destroy, it's meant to awaken." And then I understood it wasn't a message of doom. It was a call to remember. A chance to turn back before the noise swallows what's left of our souls. When I woke up, my heart was pounding, but I wasn't afraid. I was alive, more than I'd felt in years. Because maybe the real miracle isn't in what we see in the sky, but in whether we still have the courage to look up. The desert has a way of stripping things down to their truth. No noise, no crowd, no distractions, just you and the wind and the echo of your own heartbeat. That's where I found myself in the dream. Not a western desert with horses and cacti, but an endless stretch of pale earth under a sky so still it felt like time had stopped breathing. The air shimmered, not from heat, but from something deeper, like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something sacred to break the silence. I stood there, feeling small in a way that no man likes to feel, when suddenly he was there. No footsteps, no fanfare, just there, Jesus Christ. Not the radiant figure from church paintings or the glowing light people talk about in stories. He looked human, real, worn, maybe, by love too deep for words. His eyes didn't just see me, they searched through me, like he'd known every thought I'd ever had and loved me anyway. For a long moment, he said nothing. And in that silence, I realized how rare, real quiet has become in our world. We fill every second with noise, phones buzzing, TVs screaming, people shouting over each other. Maybe that's why he brought me to the desert, to get me quiet enough to listen. Then, with a voice steady and calm, he spoke. "Clint," he said, "America doesn't see what's coming. She's walking blind, chasing shadows, calling darkness light." His words hung in the air, heavy and clear, like the sound of a gunshot on a cold morning. I felt it in my chest, because he wasn't talking about politics or headlines. He was talking about hearts, the blindness that comes when a nation forgets what truth looks like. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Maybe it wasn't time for me to talk. Maybe it was time to listen. He looked out across that vast horizon, and I followed his gaze. The sky began to shift, clouds gathering slow and dark, lightning flickering in silence, like the warning before a storm. And somehow I knew what he meant. We think progress will save us. We think technology can outsmart conscience. But you can't outbuild a broken foundation. You can't fix a nation that's lost its soul with screens and slogans. Standing there beside him, I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity. The kind that cuts through excuses and leaves you face to face with what matters. He didn't come to condemn. He came to awaken. And I realized then, maybe that's why he shows up in deserts, because it's the only place left where a man can still hear the truth. He looked out over that empty horizon, the kind that stretches forever, and the silence between us felt heavier than stone. Then he spoke, and every word carried the weight of something eternal. The year ahead, he said, will shake the ground they stand on. 2026 will not be just another year, it will be a year of revealing. I remember those words like they were carved into the wind. When the masks come off, he continued, when the hidden becomes known. And in that instant, I saw it not with my eyes, but somewhere deeper, the world shifting, foundations cracking. The kind of shaking that doesn't just move the earth, but exposes what it's built on. You could almost feel the truth rising from the dirt, uninvited and unstoppable. I saw cities that weren't burning, but confused streets filled with noise, people shouting but not hearing, leaders standing behind screens, their words polished, empty, hollow. It was as if the nation itself had forgotten what truth sounded like. We'd gotten so used to pretending, so addicted to comfort, that when the ground started to move, no one knew how to stand. And I realized he wasn't talking about the end of America. He was talking about her awakening, because sometimes the only way to wake a sleeping giant is with thunder. He turned back to me, his eyes steady and full of something both fierce and tender. "Clint," he said, "this storm isn't sent to destroy, it's sent to reveal." And those words hit me harder than any sermon ever could, because maybe that's what every trial really is, a chance to see what's real when everything false is stripped away. Maybe that's what faith is supposed to look like when the lights go out. I thought about my country then, about all the years I've watched her rise and stumble. We've built towers to ourselves, monuments to success, screens to hide behind, but we've forgotten the foundation. When the shaking comes, and it will, only what's built on truth will stand. You can't fake integrity when the storm hits. You can't buy faith when fear comes knocking. He said one more thing before the wind began to stir again. Tell them not to prepare with fear, but with faith. The shaking will break what's false and strengthen what's true. The darkness will reveal the light. And then he was gone, and I was left standing in that desert, feeling both small and steady, because I understood then 2026 isn't the end of something. It's the start of something honest. A reckoning, yes, but also a revival, the kind that begins when truth finally walks back into the room. When the sky darkened in that vision, it wasn't with fire or fury, it was with confusion. I saw cities full of people, but empty of peace. Streets crowded with noise, screens glowing in every hand, everyone talking and no one listening. It felt like watching a great orchestra that had forgotten the tune. Every note clashing, every player certain they were right. Leaders stood behind cameras, words rolling off their tongues like polished glass, beautiful to the eye but hollow to the heart. You could almost hear the echo of truth, distant and fading, like something this country once knew but forgot how to hold. That's when Jesus looked at me, steady and calm, and said, "They've built towers without truth, nations without faith." His voice wasn't angry, it was grieving, and I knew he was right. We've built high but not deep. We've built fast but not strong. Our foundations, once rooted in faith, have cracked under the weight of pride and comfort. I saw it in his eyes, the sorrow of a creator watching his creation drift off course. America, the land of courage and conviction, had traded her compass for a mirror. We stopped asking what's right and started asking what's popular. We measure success in followers, not faithfulness. And somewhere between progress and pride, we lost the soul of the thing. When the wind comes, he said, what's not built on me will fall. And it wasn't a threat, it was a law of nature, like gravity. A nation can't stand forever on shifting sand. As I stood there, I couldn't help but think of all the years I'd watched this country change. I've seen men build empires and lose their families. I've seen towns thrive when they kept their hearts grounded, and fall apart when greed took the reins. America isn't just steel and soil, it's spirit. And when that spirit forgets where it came from, everything else starts to rust. He told me, tell them to prepare, not in fear, but in faith. Those words echo deep, because faith isn't passive, it's preparation. It's the farmer who plants before he sees rain. It's the soldier who trains before the war begins. Maybe that's what we need again, not more talking heads, not more promises, but people who build on truth, who lead with humility, who remember that blessings can't outlast belief. As the vision faded, I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. This wasn't just about a nation losing its way, it was about people losing their purpose. And if there's one thing I've learned in all my years, it's this: when you forget what you stand for, you fall for anything. Maybe it's time we stop building towers and start rebuilding truth. You know, people like to think the battles that shape a nation happen on big stages, Capitol steps, TV debates, maybe out there on the front lines of some foreign desert. But standing there in that vision, I learned something different. Jesus turned to me, his hand resting firm on my shoulder, and said, the fight for America's soul won't be fought in the streets or on your screens. It'll be fought inside the hearts of men. And that hit me harder than a bullet ever could, because I knew he was right. Every nation that's ever stood or fallen didn't do it because of its armies or its politics. It did it because of what lived or died inside its people. You can pass 1,000 laws, you can build walls or tear them down, but if the heart rots, the house collapses. I saw flashes, then homes scattered across the land, families sitting around dinner tables, some praying, some arguing, some staring blankly into their glowing screens. Over each home I saw a faint light. It flickered when people held grudges, burned bright when they forgave, glowed steady when they prayed. And it made me realize something simple yet profound. Nations aren't built on marble or money, they're built on moments like those. On the quiet acts of grace that no camera ever sees. The father who keeps showing up. The mother who prays when no one listens. The neighbor who lends a hand without asking which party you belong to. That's where the real power is. Jesus said, tell them to look inward before they look outward. And that's something this country's forgotten. We're quick to point fingers, slow to look in the mirror. We demand change from leaders while refusing to change ourselves. But truth is, every argument online, every divide in our streets, starts in the unseen corners of the human heart. You can't heal a nation that won't admit it's wounded. I thought about my own life, then the mistakes I've made, the people I've hurt, the times I let pride win over peace. Maybe we've all got our deserts to cross. Maybe America's in hers right now. And if that's true, the way out isn't through anger, it's through forgiveness, through love that costs something, through faith that stands when everything else shakes. When I woke from that dream, those words still echoed, the real fight is within. And I knew what he meant. The storm outside might test our strength, but the storm inside, that's the one that decides who we become. So maybe the question isn't who will lead America, but who will lead their own heart back home. Because that's where nations are born. And that's where they rise again. When he spoke again, his voice carried a kind of calm authority that could split mountains and heal hearts all at once. Tell them, he said, I'm not coming to take sides, I'm coming to take over. Those words cut through the silence like a blade. They weren't the shout of a ruler demanding allegiance. They were the quiet truth of a king reclaiming what's his. I stood there, still as stone, knowing he wasn't talking about politics or parties. He was talking about something much bigger, the end of this comfortable illusion we've all been living in, where truth bends to convenience and faith is treated like a hobby. He said, the time for choosing comfort over truth is ending. And I could feel it, the shift, the coming reckoning, not out of wrath, but out of mercy. Because a nation that forgets its maker eventually has to be reminded who he is. I thought about that for a long time after I woke. I've seen a lot of men chase comfort. I've done it myself. It's easy to mistake ease for peace. But peace doesn't come from what you own, it comes from what owns you. And for too long we've been owned by the wrong things. Screens, status, the need to be right instead of being righteous. Maybe that's what he meant, that the storm isn't punishment, it's pruning, a cleansing. The strong who built their lives on pride will crumble, and the humble who kept their faith will stand like bedrock when everything else shakes loose. I remember lying there in the dark, the echo of his words still burning in my chest. I didn't feel fear, I felt clarity, like I'd just been handed a map through the chaos. He wasn't warning me of the world's end, he was pointing toward a new beginning. Those who walk with me will endure, he'd said. Those who mock what is holy will see what mockery leads to. It wasn't vengeance, it was truth. The kind that doesn't need applause, only action. So I made up my mind that night I wasn't going to sit quietly anymore. You don't hear a message like that and roll over back to sleep. You stand up, you speak, you tell the truth even if it costs you. Because this isn't about sides, it's about souls. And maybe that's the message for all of us. The storm that's coming isn't to destroy what's good, it's to strip away what's false. And if we've still got faith when it's over, maybe we'll find we never lost anything real at all. The vision shifted like the turning of a page, and suddenly I saw the whole country stretched before me, wide, vast, restless. Jesus stood beside me, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The air was heavy, trembling with something unseen. Then he lifted his hand, and I saw them, 3 great storms forming over the land. One rising from the east, another from the west, and a third swelling right in the center. These weren't storms of wind or rain, they were spiritual ones, the kind that tear at the soul before they ever touch the ground. The first came from the east, a storm made of numbers, markets trembling, currencies falling, people watching their security vanish overnight. I saw fear written on every face, families clutching what little they had, praying the system would hold. And I heard him say, they will learn that gold cannot buy peace when hearts are empty. It hit me then how much we built our lives around what we can count instead of what we can trust. I've seen men with more money than time, but not an ounce of peace between them. The second storm rolled in from the west, a flood, not of water, but of words. I saw screens glowing across cities, each one a battleground of noise, lies dressed like truth, opinions treated like scripture, families divided by headlines, friends turned enemies over pixels and pride. Jesus looked at me and said, when truth becomes a stranger, love soon follows. Tell them to guard their hearts, not their arguments. I knew exactly what he meant. We've become addicted to outrage, more comfortable fighting than forgiving. We'd rather win than be right. But love without truth is weakness, and truth without love is cruelty. We've forgotten that both are meant to walk hand in hand. Then came the third storm, the one from the heartland. It was quiet at first, but heavy, like the stillness before an earthquake. I saw churches growing empty, faith treated like folklore, people believing in everything but God. A coldness had crept in, subtle but deadly. Jesus' voice grew firm. This is the test of America's soul, not what they build, but what they believe. Not what they own, but who they obey. Those words cut deep. Because it's true, every empire falls, not from attack, but from decay within. I looked out across the land and saw that these storms weren't meant to destroy. They were meant to reveal, to separate what's real from what's hollow. And as I stood there watching the sky tremble, I realized something. Storms don't come to end a story, they come to remind us what's worth rebuilding. Maybe that's what faith really is, not avoiding the storm, but standing through it, knowing who's in control when the world starts to shake. When the vision shifted again, I saw something standing tall against the horizon, a great tree stretching across the land. Its roots ran deep beneath the soil, thick and strong, but its branches were withered, broken in places, and its leaves hung tired like the breath of a nation losing its will to live. I didn't need to ask what it meant. I knew. That tree was America, strong roots, rich soil, but branches poisoned by pride and neglect. Then Jesus stepped forward, his hand resting against the trunk, and where his light touched, life began to flow upward. Dry bark turned to color, dying limbs began to heal, and leaves shimmered like they'd been kissed by dawn. This tree, he said, was planted with purpose. Its roots are faith. Its soil is freedom. But the fruit has turned bitter. Yet if they turn back to me, I will heal the roots, and the fruit will live again. I stood there watching the light climb through that tree, and I thought about the seasons I've lived through, the times America bloomed and the times she broke. I've seen the country roar with strength, and I've seen her bleed from her own division. It's easy to forget that every nation, just like every man, has to be pruned to grow again. We cut away the dead to make room for the living. Maybe that's what this shaking is all about. Then I saw something else. The wind stirred, and from every corner of the land, I heard voices not of protest or anger, but of awakening. Young people standing up, not for power or fame, but for truth. They weren't polished or political. They were hungry for something real, something worth believing in again. Jesus smiled when he looked at them. I will raise a generation that remembers me, he said. They will not come from power, but from humility and fire. That moment stayed with me, because I've spent my life watching generations come and go, some strong, some lost. But this one, the one he showed me, had a different kind of light in their eyes, the kind that doesn't come from comfort, but from calling. And it made me wonder, maybe the story of America isn't ending, it's being rewritten. Maybe all this chaos isn't the fall, it's the tilling of soil, making way for something new to grow. As the light climbed higher through that tree, I could almost feel its warmth in my chest. Hope, that's what it was. Not the cheap kind that fades when the wind changes, but the kind that's earned. The kind that's built on roots that refuse to die. And as I watched the branches bloom again, I heard him whisper one last thing. I'm not done with this land. And somehow I believed him. When the storms finally began to fade, the land looked quiet again, like the world had taken a deep breath after a long night of chaos. The skies that once raged with thunder now glowed with a faint, gentle light. I remember standing there, watching as small sparks began to flicker across the map of the nation. Not fires of destruction, but of awakening. In homes where there had been shouting, I saw peace. In churches that had sat empty, I saw candles being lit again. Families gathered not around screens but around tables. Neighbors, once divided, bowed their heads side by side. Those lights weren't from cities or towers, they came from people, from hearts that had remembered what it means to care, to hope, to believe again. Jesus stood beside me, his eyes on that horizon that was slowly bleeding into gold. That, he said softly, is my plan, not destruction, but awakening. The shaking will not kill them. It will call them. And I realized then that the storm hadn't been a punishment, it had been a mercy, because sometimes the only way to wake a sleeping world is to let the thunder roll. The darkness wasn't meant to bury us. It was meant to make us look for the light. I thought about that long after the vision ended. Maybe that's the secret of every hard season. What feels like breaking is often the making of something new. We've been so afraid of falling apart that we forgot falling apart is how rebuilding begins. The strongest steel still has to face the fire. The most honest hearts are the ones that have been broken and healed. When the first light of dawn spread across that land, it wasn't fast. It crept, quiet and certain, like grace. You could feel warmth returning, the kind that doesn't scorch but restores. Jesus looked at it the way a craftsman looks at something he's been shaping for a long time. The dawn will come, he said. But before the light, there must be awakening. And as he spoke, I knew he wasn't just talking about a country. He was talking about every soul that's wandered too far, every person who's forgotten what they were made for. I woke with those words ringing inside me. The night outside my window was still dark, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt full of promise, because dawn isn't just a time of day, it's a choice. It's the moment you decide to get up, to start again, to believe there's still something worth fighting for. And maybe that's what faith really is, the stubborn conviction that even after the darkest night, the light will always find its way back. When I thought the vision had ended, I woke in the dark, breathing slow, heart steady, but something in me said, "Close your eyes again." And when I did, I was pulled right back, not to a storm or a desert this time, but to a wide, open field. The kind of place where the air feels cleaner, where the silence hums with peace. The light there was softer than dawn, warm and gold, like grace itself had taken form. Jesus wasn't standing before me this time, but his voice filled the air like a familiar melody you'd forgotten you knew. He said, "Now I will show you what will rise when the shaking ends." And before my eyes I saw small fires flickering across the land, tiny trembling flames scattered in every direction. At first they looked fragile, but one by one they grew brighter. Each one was a home, a family, a soul rediscovering what it means to believe again. I saw fathers kneeling beside their children, mothers praying at kitchen tables, people forgiving what once felt unforgivable. No cameras, no noise, no spectacle, just quiet redemption. It wasn't about revival in the way we talk about it these days. It wasn't stadiums or headlines or celebrity faith. It was real, personal, costly. It was hearts mending what pride had broken. Jesus' voice whispered through that field, "This is the true awakening, not a movement but a miracle." As I watched, the fires began to connect, one flame meeting another, until the land itself glowed with light. Churches that had once been empty filled again, not with crowds chasing performance, but with souls chasing peace. I saw people confessing, reconciling, rebuilding what anger had destroyed. The noise of the world faded, replaced by laughter, prayer, and the steady rhythm of grace doing its quiet work. And I'll tell you something, I felt hope then. Not the kind you read about, but the kind you feel deep down, like a pulse in your chest. Because I realized that change doesn't start from the top down. It starts from the inside out. Nations aren't rebuilt by laws, they're rebuilt by love. You want to see revival? Start at your own table. Forgive someone. Tell the truth when it costs you. Bow your head when no one's watching. That's how the fire spreads. As the vision began to fade, Jesus spoke one last time. "When they bow, I will lift them. When they forgive, I will heal them. When they remember, I will restore them." I opened my eyes and felt tears on my face, not from fear, but from gratitude. Because I knew then the story wasn't over. The fire hadn't gone out. It was just beginning to burn again, quietly, humbly, like the start of dawn after a long, cold night. As I stood in that golden field, the fire still glowing across the land, the vision shifted once more. Jesus' voice came again, not loud but steady, like thunder speaking through peace. "Now," he said, "I will show you the ones who will rise when the light returns." The world around me seemed to move, and from the haze of morning I saw faces, ordinary men and women, scattered across the country. They weren't famous, they weren't powerful, but there was something in their eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Clarity, conviction, courage. "These," he said, "are the watchmen." I saw them standing at the edges of confusion, teachers, pastors, mothers, soldiers, young men and women who refused to bow to the lies of the age. They could see through the fog when others couldn't. They weren't shouting to be heard. They were listening, discerning, guarding the truth like it was sacred gold. Jesus said, "Their weapon will be wisdom. They will see clearly when the world goes blind." Then the scene shifted again, and I saw the builders. Their hands were rough, their faces worn, but their spirits were steady. They worked quietly, repairing what others had broken: families, towns, friendships, trust. They didn't seek applause. They sought purpose. These were the kind of people who still believed that small, honest work could change the world. I watched them pick up broken stones from the ruins and start rebuilding, not with pride, but with patience. They will not seek power, Jesus said, but they will carry strength. For I build my kingdom through those who serve, not those who shout. Then came the third group, the healers. I saw them walking among the weary, lifting those who'd fallen, binding wounds no medicine could reach. Some healed with words, some with kindness, some just by being there when no one else was. Their love was quiet, but it spread faster than hate. Jesus said, "They will carry my heart where bitterness once ruled. They will not be known by name, but by love." And as they moved, the darkness began to pull back, like shadows retreating from the dawn. Watching it all, I realized something. These weren't heroes from movies or prophets from history. They were us, ordinary people who decided to be faithful when the world went mad. People who believed that truth was still worth defending, that love was still stronger than hate, that light, no matter how small, still mattered. The world doesn't need louder voices, it needs steadier hearts. When the vision faded, I carried those faces with me, the watchmen, the builders, the healers, and it hit me, maybe that's who we're all called to be. Not the ones waiting for someone else to fix it, but the ones willing to stand, to build, to mend. Because that's how the darkness breaks, not through noise or force, but through faith that refuses to die. When I woke from that dream, I didn't feel the weight of doom like you might expect after seeing storms and shaking skies. What I felt was clarity, because I finally understood those storms weren't sent to destroy us. They were sent to refine us. That's the part people miss. We think when the ground starts trembling, it means the end. But sometimes, it's just God testing what's real and burning away what's fake. Fire doesn't just consume, it purifies. Gold has to pass through heat before it shines, and maybe that's what's coming in 2026. Not punishment, purification, a chance for us to see who we really are when everything comfortable gets stripped away. I've lived long enough to know this country's been through plenty of storms before. Wars, depressions, moral confusion, you name it. But the thing that always saved her wasn't politics or money or the loudest voice on TV. It was character. Quiet, unshakable character. The kind that shows up when no one's watching. The kind that works hard, prays harder, forgives deeper, and stands taller even when the wind's against you. That's the backbone of America. And somewhere along the way, we traded it for convenience. We stopped asking what's right and started asking what's easy. But storms have a way of reminding you what's worth holding on to. Jesus said, "The storm will reveal, but it will also refine." And that line's been running through my head ever since. Because he's right. The shaking that's coming isn't to break us, it's to build us. Every challenge, every failure, every bit of loss we face in the days ahead will be a mirror showing us what's still true inside. And maybe that's the mercy in it all. Maybe he's giving us a chance to remember what we've forgotten, to find faith again, not as a slogan, but as a way of life. I've seen men who lost everything in war come back stronger because they learned that peace was never about safety, it was about purpose. I've seen families torn apart find healing because they chose forgiveness over pride. And I've seen darkness lose every time a single person decided not to give up hope. That's how revival begins. Not with crowds chanting, but with one heart choosing to stand when it would be easier to fall. So, when people ask me if I'm afraid of what's coming, I tell them no. Because the truth is, sometimes the only way to rebuild a house is to let the storm tear off the weak parts first. And when it's over, what's left, the real foundation, will be stronger than ever. That's not the end of America, that's her refining fire. And maybe, just maybe, it's the start of her becoming who she was always meant to be. When all the visions faded and I opened my eyes for the last time, the world outside my window looked the same, but I wasn't. The dream had changed something in me, burned something into my soul. I sat there watching the first light of morning push through the darkness, and it hit me the message wasn't about what was coming to us. It was about what needed to rise from us. The real power to change a nation doesn't sit in some marble building or flow from a headline. It starts right here, in the quiet places, inside ordinary hearts that still believe in something greater than themselves. Jesus' last words to me echoed like thunder in my chest. Tell them not to wait for the light, tell them to be it. And I've carried that line like a torch ever since. Because that's the truth, isn't it? We keep waiting for someone else to fix things, a new leader, a new movement, a miracle from the sky. But maybe the miracle's already here, waiting inside every one of us. The father who works 2 jobs and still comes home to read his kid a story. The mother who prays for her family when nobody's looking. The young man who chooses honesty when a lie would make life easier. The woman who forgives when she has every reason not to. Those are the lights that hold a nation together. You don't need fame to shine. You just need courage, the kind that stands tall when the world bends low. I've seen what darkness can do. I've seen how fast hope can vanish when people give up on what's right. But I've also seen the opposite. I've seen one small act of kindness turn into a wildfire of good. I've seen broken men become beacons of strength because they refuse to stay down. Light isn't loud, it's steady. It doesn't demand attention, it just shows the way. And that's what we're called to do now. So, if 2026 brings shaking, if the headlines grow darker and the storms rise again, don't lose heart. Remember what I saw. The dawn always follows the longest night. And if you've still got breath in your lungs and faith in your heart, you've got work to do. Be the light in your home, be the truth in your circle, be the hope in your corner of the world. Because if enough of us decide to do that, this country won't just survive, it'll shine. You want to know how America finds her way back? It's not through power. It's not through politics. It's through people, ordinary, faithful, stubborn souls who still believe that goodness matters. So don't wait for someone else to be the light. Be it, because when enough lights stand together, even the darkest night has to bow to the dawn.